You know, your life is not a straight line from beginning to end. Every story has its own twists and turns. Many threads are woven into every story, and often those threads are, well, they're unexpected. Over the next 2 intriguing episodes, we're going to share a story that weaves together the tapestry that will take you through the world of $48 billion asset management to contemporary slave trade. Yeah, I did say that. A slave trade that makes the world before the Civil War look like a mom-and-pop operation. We're going to talk to you about an independent movie based on a true story that grossed over $250 million, and yet Hollywood snubbed it. Those threads are intertwined into the story of this man, the man you're about to meet, and how he and his team have actively changed the lives of children worldwide, children who are often invisible. Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. Join the movement of deeply curious learners by hitting the subscribe button right now. The Dov Baron Show is not just another podcast. This is your passport to unparalleled insights. Each episode is filled with wisdom of global leaders, scientists, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, and journalists, from astronauts who have traveled the vastness of space to presidential candidates who are trying to make sense of the world on the brink. We dive into the most intriguing minds. For the next 2 episodes, our special guests' insights will captivate, awaken, and inspire you. Just hit the subscribe button and become part of our global community. One of the most successful independent films in history grossed over $250 million and is based on a true story. Now, again, one of the most successful independent movies of all time. You probably saw films like Little Miss Sunshine or so many great independent movies that became famous, Oscar-worthy, etc., etc. So why don't you know about this one? Well, our guest, Paul Hutchinson, is the primary investor in and executive producer in one of those most successful movies. In fact, this movie. Paul held a pivotal role in the rescue of over 120 victims in Colombia from a child trafficking organization, one of the largest child rescues in history. The Sound of Freedom is the title of this 2023 film featuring Jim Caviezel. And you may never have heard of it. It's based on a true story of a former government agent turned vigilante who rescues children from human trafficking. In the years after the mission, our guest, Paul Hutchinson, founded the Child Liberation Foundation, an organization actively involved in the fight against child trafficking, and he has led or held a critical role in over 70 undercover rescue missions in 15 countries. Paul has contributed to or been directly involved in the rescuing of over 5,000 children. However, before his child rescue work, Paul was a Bridge investment group partner and co-founder. Bridge now has over $48 billion in assets under management and is publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Ladies and gentlemen, turn up the volume and help me to welcome recipient of the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, the 2022 International Medal of Freedom, recipient of the Race Award from Harvard Business School, board member for Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation, board member of the FBI Civilian Academy, and a whole lot more of amazing awards, founder of the Liberation for Humanity, Mr. Paul Hutchinson.
Thank you, Dov. Honored to be here on your show.
That took a lot for me to get through. Your resume is insane, to say the least. And as I said, a lot of twists and turns. I'm really glad to have you here, mate. Thank you so much.
Well, a few little corrections. I actually retired from the company that I founded in 2017, and we only had like 20-something billion under management. Way smarter people than me took it and kept growing it after I retired. I guess, you built something right when you can walk away and have it continue to double and triple.
Well, one of the common areas that you and I have is in the multi-generational family wealth business. As you know, it's third generation, and it's long sleeve, short sleeve, long sleeve. And what that means is that usually when you walk away, it goes down. And I think you've done something right when you walk away and it goes up. So kudos to you on that one.
I had a mentor in my early 20s. He said, Paul, if you go into business, you have to make sure it's a business that you own, not one that owns you. And that's what we strive to do from the beginning, is build something with integrity, but build it right so that it would continue to run and operate when we weren't there and make a positive impact in the lives of those who are still there.
No, I want to get into the movie The Sound of Freedom. I want to get into the child rescuing because those are intriguing in and of themselves. But I also want to go to who you are. To me, that's a more important piece for us to jump off into. And what I mean by that is you're in this world of asset management. I saw the pictures with you in the fancy cars and the nice suits and all those things. And it looks a lot like Cheeseball Central, which is my term. And it looks a lot like the kind of people who might be going to Epstein Island. What I mean by that is you look like you belong in the world of massive amounts of ego. And then you're in this other world. Is that a contradiction of who you were? Is that who you were and you moved out of it? Give us a little bit of background on that part.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Dov. I'm not afraid to admit, 10 years ago when I got recruited to go undercover and play the part of a wealthy investor interested in funding a project similar to Jeffrey Epstein Island, these traffickers thought that if they could get $5 to $8 million from me, they could build something that would net them tens of millions of dollars a year. And the reason I was asked to come is, frankly, I fit that profile, right? That was the kind of thing these traffickers had seen over and over again, was guys with big egos, a huge head, the ability to throw cash at whatever they wanted to. And yeah, I wasn't Paul Hutchinson 10 years ago. I was Paul effing Hutchinson. I had built a multi-billion-dollar company. I had a basketball court in my basement. I had all of the NBA players, when they were in town, would come over to my house for after parties and whatnot. This is the kind of life I was living, and the average person would look at that and say, oh, wow, that's what I want to work so hard for. But understand, I was empty. I was on my second marriage, heading for a failure on that one. I didn't have healthy relationships with my kids at the time. Everybody wanted to come to my parties, but then they'd drink all my booze and leave, and leave me with a huge mess. And I'm thinking, do they really respect? And from a charitable standpoint, maybe to offset my ego or whatever, I was donating a lot of money and even time to child-related charities. I was on the Make-A-Wish board of directors for 7 years. I was the incoming chairman in the area with Make-A-Wish. And that's when I got a call from our attorney general that was my first introduction. He said, Paul, I know you donate a lot of money to child-related charities. He said, I need to talk to you about something that's pretty dark. He said, this is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world, and good people don't even know that it's happening. He talked to me about human trafficking, and in particular, child trafficking, and how there was a federal agent in Colombia that wanted to rescue a bunch of kids. The government wouldn't give him the money to do it because he couldn't prove that there was Americans involved. Long story short, that was the guy who we had Jim Caviezel play his part in the movie because he had the background there. But I was in this opulent world, and my whole life was about to take a full 180.
Staying with you for a minute, because that's a very intriguing path, and we're definitely going to go down it. But I don't know what you know about my work. I work with these people with those kinds of egos. They're my clients. Oftentimes, their life is very externally successful, internally empty, and they have a sense of that. They know that. They don't know who to tell it, but then they suddenly say, okay, I need to talk to somebody. They talk to a mutual friend of ours, and they say, who do I talk to about this? Because there's something got missing inside of me, and they come and do work with me. That's not to promote me. It's to say this. Where we always end up is this. Human beings are driven by trauma. And what I mean by that is your purpose is hidden in your pain. Something happened within us that we may have compartmentalized, may have no memory of, that's gone on, that's driven us to have a level of success. Oftentimes that trauma, that pain, drives us to an empty success and another and another and another. And well, I've got $1 billion, now I need 10 billion. And then there comes the turning point where you turn that into something that's very positive. I'm really fascinated from our original conversation, which is 8-9 months ago, about what it is. Have you come to recognize what it was that was driving you to that success that you had and to the turn of what you're doing now?
Yeah, I believe there were multiple things that were under the surface, and I didn't even realize them until later. Some of the realities of sexual abuse and child trafficking were happening in my own backyard, in my own neighborhood, and were directly impacting my family. And I didn't even know it at the time. I was trying to figure out how to deal with all this emotion and all these people and the things that they were coming through. And I thinking maybe there was something I wasn't doing right. Fast forward, when I got introduced to this world and about the same time came to a realization that a lot of that pain that I was going through was, and working with these other close people in my circle, was due to some of those same challenges they had as children. When I realized how prevalent this problem was. And in the movie, when Jim Caviezel's trying to convince my character to come down, my character is Pablo in the movie. Eduardo Verástegui, he is a Mexican actor. He's trying to convince him to come and make this decision to come down there. I was set. I was living in this posh world and I had this big ego and whatever. And in the movie, I pushed back and said, no, I have no interest in being down there and going undercover and physically being there, even putting any money into it. And he had to give me this picture of this little 11-year-old girl to my driver. And that's what convinced me. In real life, when I got that call to come down there, I immediately said, yeah, what do you need? How can I help? And when I was sitting with the traffickers and they showed me that picture, that's what galvanized my commitment. So at the time, I didn't know who I was. I was stuck in this loveless relationships because of all of these dark challenges that were out there. And yes, it drove me to success. I worked 18-hour days, so I didn't have to come home to a relationship that wasn't there. And I was super successful financially, but still empty because the most important things in life weren't being taken care of at the time.
But did you have any sense of that being related to your own childhood at that time? Or did that come later through interacting with these children in trauma?
Yeah. Once I really started recognizing what that trauma looks like, then I realized the people in my inner circle and in my family who had some of those same traits. So yeah, it wasn't until I was actively involved in the work that all of this stuff came to a surface. It all came to a surface about the same time. That just galvanized my commitment to dedicate my life to eradicating this evil.
See, it's really interesting. As I said, I think that we're all driven by some form of pain. Human beings are driven by pain. That's not my opinion, that's psychology. Doing something about it is important, but oftentimes these things are compartmentalized within us and there needs to be a catalyst. And this is clearly a catalyst for you against that ego. I understand because I was part of that world too, only on the receiving end. I was part of a pedophile ring as a child. My sister and I, we went through that. So I got involved in 2013. I interviewed Dottie Laster, who trains the American police forces and many other forces around sex slavery, not just with children, but human trafficking. And back in 2013, we were talking about how there was more slavery today. 2013, so it's 11 years ago as we record this. 2013, there was more slavery today than there was during the time where slavery was legal. That's not gone down, that's gone up. You gave out some stats around this. Bring people into this because we think of this as being something out there, something separate from us. And we go, well, in these third world countries, I know that in Thailand and in places like that, but they've no idea that this is on your back door.
Absolutely. Yeah. People come after watching The Sound of Freedom and they say, Paul, what can I do? How can I help? Well, and I tell them this. I said that the worst thing that you can do is go down to Colombia and be a Rambo and try to rescue kids. You're going to get shot and you'll probably get arrested. The best thing you can do is go home and hug your kids. People are like, how's that going to fix that? You know, it's not happening here. Yes, it is. And in fact, you'd be amazed at the number of trafficked children being sold for sex, how many of them sleep on their own pillows at night at home and their parents have no idea. They're, what? Here's the thing. Yes, there are situations where a healthy family will have a child that's taken, put on a container ship and gone to another country, like you're going to see it. That's very, very, very seldom that ever happens. The majority of children who are actually physically taken come from broken families, runaways, broken foster care program. These are where these kids are coming from. In addition to that, if you walk out your front door of any neighborhood in America, even the nice ones that you're in a gated community, guess what? Walk out on your front porch, look left and look right. There's a very, very high chance that one or more of those homes is a dangerous place for children. You need to have a relationship with your children where they can very comfortably come to you and say, hey, Mom, Dad, this happened at recess today. These kids held me down. They touched me. Or they need to be able to come to you and say, Dad, I don't like it when you make me hug Uncle Harry because he touches me here. We don't like going to this friend's house because her brother grabs me on my bum. Or our babysitter is telling us, she's showing us pornography and tells us that we should trust her more than. These are all grooming behaviors, and they're things that we as parents need to be aware of that I had no clue of 20 plus years ago. From a statistical standpoint, 10 years ago, when I made that commitment, I looked at the numbers. There were somewhere between 8 and 10 million children being sold for sex, organ harvesting, labor type things, actually physically being sold. Today, that number is much higher. There's so many numbers going around, but it's more than all 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade put together. Now, here's the scary thing, though. I realized the end of last year, actually, no, it's a little over a year ago now, in 2022, when I was still doing undercover. I realized that every time we pulled 20 children out of hell, we left a vacuum. And if not enough was being done to fix the demand, then another 20 children were being sucked back into this horrible place. And it was growing because now we're having to deal with all of the trauma therapy of the kids that were rescued. Yes, we made a powerful difference in their lives, but we also now have these others that are sucked back in. And so I took a step back and I started looking at where it's coming from. Was this just some random guys that are in their mid-40s and they're rich and they're bored and they want to go to Colombia and do horrible things? I came to an understanding that 1 out of every 4 women listening to us today, 1 out of every 4 women in most first world countries, in fact, most of the world, 1 in every 4 have been a victim of sexual violence as a child. It's more than 40% at some time in their life. For men, it's a little bit less. It's 1 in 5. It's about 20% at some time in our life. But the majority of those men, it was when we were children. And a lot of men don't want to talk about it. They're like, oh, that thing that happened, my uncle when I was 8, if I talk about that, that'll make me less of that. No, it won't. You were 8. There was a horrible thing that happened from somebody who was dealing with a lot of pain themselves, no justification, but still that doesn't define you today. And the simple act of admitting and talking about it makes it so that the chances of you ever passing on that trauma to another child goes down significantly from like 1 in 3 to about 1 in 50. And so that's what we need to do is just understand that this is a catastrophic problem. It's likely happening with kids in your own neighborhood or your own family that have been abused in some way. And if we can create a system of healing there, then we can save millions of children, not just.
And that's the key point here is that this is epidemic. You've talked about, as I just mentioned earlier, we think of this as being in another country. But talk to us about what you know from what's going on in the United States. There's a lot of political stuff, we know that, and a lot of the political stuff is, this is a Christian country. And I'm like, okay, if you're a Christian country, then you would walk in the way of Christ. I'm not Christian, so I'm not preaching at anybody. Therefore, you're against abortion because you're pro-life, but you're willing to kill people for a crime. That seems a bit odd. You're either pro-life or you're not. And then there is, blessed are the little children, and we're a modern Christian country, so we treat women with respect. Pornhub would disagree. Talk to us about what you know.
Well, first of all, the United States is the number 1 producer and consumer of child pornography in the world.
Number 1 producer and consumer. Did you get that? So you're thinking it's going out there in some third world country? This is happening here. And you said child.
Yeah. And understand this. We had a sister foundation that had a piece of software that went into the dark web. This is where a lot of these perpetrators believe that they're being anonymous. Now, I can see the sweat coming on people's foreheads that are listening to us right now if they've done some things that aren't, valuable. Okay, so here's the thing. They think that they're anonymous. We had this piece of software that would go in and pretend like it was a pedophile that was looking for videos online. And that way we didn't have to have any agents that were looking at these horrible things. And it would go out and identify people who were downloading these horrible images and videos. And here's the scary number, Dov. In the United States alone, during a 1-month period of time, we identified 800,000 unique individuals who had downloaded a child rape video. That's almost 1 million. That's just the ones that our piece of software were able to identify. And these guys think they're anonymous. This doesn't go after your VPN that you're going through a whole bunch of different things. This goes and identifies your global identifier number unique to your computer. And then it runs these algorithms to try to figure out who are the most likely contact offenders, meaning what types of things are they downloading, are they uploading things, et cetera, so that we can prioritize the law enforcement focus on taking down those people. But that tells you how big of a problem it is. If the United States has 350 million people, you figure that a couple 100 million of them are women and children. You got roughly 100 million adult men. And 1 in every 100 in 1 month with just our one piece of software downloaded something like that, you realize what kind of a problem we have. Because eventually these guys want to act out on these horrific fantasies. That's where the children are most vulnerable.
I know you've dealt with a lot of law enforcement and even the legal system in other countries. Is it right that you went to Congress?
Not in the United States. Sean Reyes did, our Attorney General, and Tim, the guy who Jim Caviezel played. So I've worked with Congress in multiple countries in Latin America. In fact, I'm in Latin America right now meeting with some political officials down here. But yeah, they met with Congress. In fact, they helped change a few laws in the U.S. over the last 10 years, which is a big, big deal when it comes to arresting Americans on foreign soil.
I'm not going to ask you the psychological questions because those are my side, but the psychology of this is a fascinating area in and of itself that we could get into at another time because of why people are going down that dark, dark road in the, quote, wealthiest country in the world is pretty sad. Meanwhile, we're fighting about whether rainbows are okay in a schoolroom. It's like craziness from my point of view.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's go back a bit because before we get into part 2 of the show, you were this high-flying, ego-driven guy with all this money under asset. As you said, you were Paul effing Hutchinson. There's a reference in the movie that I thought, oh, that's a bit of a dig, because the character that Jim Caviezel plays says he knows a guy who likes to play cop, and he's referring to Babylon, which is your character. Talk to us a little bit about that dig.
For sure. I met our Attorney General, Sean Reyes, at a training academy for the FBI Citizens Academy. I was on a board of directors for that. My entire life, I always felt like I would be in a war. I don't know why, but I didn't want to be unprepared for that. So I got really, really good at a lot of things. You know why?
I know why.
It was part of my mission here, but yeah, I just felt it from the time I was a kid. I took so many courses on hand-to-hand combat training and my gun training. One of my trainers was a former trainer for the FBI in handguns and long range. He got my spread at 20 yards to this at fast draw, et cetera. It was just amazing. He invited me to come and meet some of the FBI guys. And then I went through that training and got very involved and was donating a lot of money to whether it was the Federal Enforcement Homeland Security Foundation or whether it was the FBI Citizens Academy or a lot of the local police departments because I decided years ago that I was going to donate 10 to 20% of my money to charities. And it just didn't feel right just giving money to a guy on the side of the street that I don't know if he was needing it for drug money or whatever else. So I focused my charitable donations to 2 things, to anything having to do with children and anything having to do with people who would put their lives in danger to protect mine. And so, yeah, there's some bad apples out there. I know, because we arrested a bunch in different countries that were involved in law enforcement. But overall, I think anybody who puts their lives in danger for mine deserves my respect. I'd go on ride-alongs with the different police departments, all kinds of stuff like that. But that's where he's got all this money and likes to play cop. They knew that little dig was more of the fact that I wasn't just your average hedge fund manager. Every other weekend, I was training on Krav Maga and hand-to-hand combat and edged weapons training, et cetera, et cetera. So it made me so I was somewhat safe in a dangerous position.
Right. So in part 2 of the show, I want to talk about the rescue missions, and I also want to talk about your involvement in the movie, because those are 2 separate things that are obviously very connected, but they are separate things because you're this hedge fund manager guy, you understand money, which is also how you end up being part of the rescue mission and is how your character is portrayed in the movie. So I want to come back and talk more about that in part 2 of the show. It's important because I know you have created organizations to help and to do all kinds of things, and it's really important that people know about that. And by the way, Paul and I will both be speaking together in Bermuda in May of 2024. And if you want to know more about that, you can reach out to me or to Paul. But Paul, please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and your organization.
Absolutely. You can go to Liberating, with an ING, liberatinghumanity.com. And you can get all kinds of links to places I'm speaking. You can get downloads of free videos from some of my trainers, my edge weapons trainer, my Krav Maga trainers, and also some of my, I'm going to call it my spiritual trainers. Everything from breath work to guided meditation to things like that are important. When you've seen 8-year-olds being sold, there's a level of trauma there that you've got to figure out how to work through. So you can go to Liberating Humanity on Twitter. I just barely opened up an X account. So I literally have like 30 friends there. That's just under my name. Just go to Paul Hutchinson. You can find me on Twitter, but all the other social media is Liberating Humanity.
Okay, we'll make sure that, of course, that those links are posted in the show notes. So you'll be able to go there. If you're just listening right now, you can find them in the show notes of wherever you're listening to podcasts. We're going to be back for more of our delicious conversation with Paul Hutchinson and the sound of freedom, but more liberating humanity and what that really means in this world where sex slavery and slavery in general is bigger than it ever was. It's bigger than it was when slavery was legal for 300 years. Just consider that for a moment. Like, it's that big a problem. And as we talked about in part 1, it's a problem that's going on right under your nose. We're going to be back for part 2 of this delicious conversation. So stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.